We view the domestic terrorist threat as being persistent, I should say. We have seen over the last 5 to 6 years an increase in the number of known or suspected terrorists, in other words, watch-listed subjects attempting to cross the border.
He videotaped sex acts with prominent people because he was trying to incur with young girls that he had procured to try to incur favor with those prominent people. Do you have those tapes?
Again, I can't discuss the specifics of our law enforcement operations. We know that China has specifically identified agriculture as one of its areas that it wants to target.
Does that sound to you like coordinated election interference, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, I'm not going to discuss pending state criminal prosecutions. All the reasons people love AI for good things, they can use for bad things.
Could you comment on the threat to the Jewish community, which may originate organically here in the United States or may be driven by Hamas and other anti-Semitic groups?
So we see, and we have seen for quite some time, an elevated threat to the Jewish community in the United States. That was true even before October 7th. So, we saw last year a significant increase in hate crimes overall, and then within that, a significant increase of hate crimes against threats and other types of violent activity directed at the Jewish community. And then since October 7th, the increase just went up dramatically. I think in the first 4 months after October 7th, we saw about a 60% increase in the number of hate crimes investigations we were opening. And while not all of those were targeting the Jewish community, some were targeting Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, and others, the vast majority were targeting the Jewish community.
This year, if you don't get what the president asked for, how many personnel do you estimate you'll have to lay off?
Well, we don't know yet how many, because of course we don't know what will happen. I think at the moment, the effect of the 24 budget is that that's about 1,000 positions that we can't fill. And we are kind of muddling our way through the impact of the 24 budget. But if Congress were to, in my view, make the mistake of doubling down on that, then the consequences would be very significant. I mentioned the work we're doing to protect people from terrorism. That's fewer tips and leads followed, fewer terrorist attacks detected. That's a significant concern in a heightened terrorist threat environment. I mentioned violent crime, arresting 50 bad guys per day, every day. The kind of cuts that you're alluding to means more violent gangs terrorizing neighborhoods, more bad guys on the street to hurt people. I talked about the threat from China. The scale of the China threat is massive. We view the domestic terrorist threat as being persistent, I should say, and significant. And the biggest concern is lone actors or maybe small groups acting against soft targets with easily accessible weapons, often with very little notice. And it covers the waterfront. We've seen a lot of racially motivated violent extremism. We've seen anti-government, anti-authority violent extremism that covers a variety of perspectives. And it is a threat that year after year continues to be a real concern.
You request $85.4 million for the restoration of 270 positions related to national security and law enforcement. Is this your highest priority?
The restoration of positions is our highest priority, yes.
I recognize that the primary responsibility implicates the failures of the Department of Homeland Security, but the FBI Terrorist Screening Center is the primary federal entity responsible for national security screening and for facilitating the sharing of information across government. Do these cases reflect a breakdown in our efforts to ensure that all government partners have full, actionable information they need to protect our citizens from terrorism?
So I'm not sure I can discuss specific examples, but let me try to get at your question this way. So certainly, we have seen over the last 5 to 6 years an increase in the number of known or suspected terrorists, in other words, watch-listed subjects attempting to cross the border. And that is of concern, and that's where there's a lash-up between the TSC and CBP at the border that I think in general works pretty well.
I wanted to ask you just to take this opportunity to once again put a nail in the coffin of this idea that somehow the FBI was complicit in organizing, instigating the January 7th, 6th attacks. You said in July of last year, so a little under a year ago, quote, "This notion that somehow the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and agents is ludicrous and is a disservice to our brave, hardworking, dedicated men and women," unquote. Director Wray, can you confirm just how outrageous and frankly dangerous these kinds of assertions are?
Well, first off, I stand by my prior testimony. I think the men and women of the FBI work their tails off every day to protect the American people from a whole range of threats. And I think irresponsible, inaccurate allegations like that are a disservice to these people who are putting themselves on the line every day to protect others. And I think it's unfortunate would be the kindest word I can use.
If you took the major Mexican drug cartels, which also traffic people into the United States, and turned them upside down and shook them, President Lopez Obrador would fall out of their pockets, wouldn't he?
Well, I don't know that I can comment on a specific individual's corruption other than through cases that we bring. But I understand the point that you're making, for sure.
We're not getting much cooperation out of Mexico, are we?
Let me put it this way. While we have had some successes here and there in terms of extraditions and so forth, and I appreciate those, and I'm grateful to our Mexican partners for those, especially at the working level, we need a whole lot more from Mexico than we've got.
We know that Jeffrey Epstein, who is now deceased, and Ms. Maxwell, his associate, who's in prison, were engaged in a conspiracy of sex trafficking with minors. So are others. It's been widely reported. What's the FBI doing to investigate the other people that were involved in these sex trafficking rings?
Well, I'm not sure that I can confirm any specific individual.
Well, let me
being
put it this way.
investigated.
Let me give you some facts, widely reported. Jeffrey Epstein had video surveillance in all of his homes and on his private island. And there have been articles after articles from witnesses who have said he videotaped sex acts with prominent people because he was trying to incur with young girls that he had procured to try to incur favor with those prominent people and potentially to be able to blackmail them. Now, that's a fact. And the FBI and other federal agencies have raided his houses. Do you have those tapes?
Again, I can't discuss the specifics of our law enforcement operations related to Mr. Epstein or Ms. Maxwell, but obviously we had very active investigation related to both of them. But whether it extends to other people, I'm not sure that's something that I can comment on.
A suit was filed yesterday against one of those prominent people by one of the young women sex trafficked, allegedly, said he was part of the ring. It's on the front page. I don't know, is this the New York Times, Wall Street Journal? And we keep seeing article after article after article. And we keep hearing about prominent person after prominent person after prominent person. I just want to know if these prominent people are above the law and are going to be, and aren't being investigated, or is the FBI investigating them?
Well, no one is above the law, number one. As to whether specific people are being investigated, that's not something that I, as I'm sure you can appreciate, can engage on here. We've devoted significant resources to the investigation.
Is it ongoing?
I'm not sure there's anything I can share with you on that, but let me see if we can get back to you and provide a little more information.
Well, for example,
about
these allegations in this lawsuit, the civil action.
Yeah, I haven't seen
You ought to read
the article.
It'll trigger your gag reflex. Is the FBI going to investigate that?
Well, again, I haven't seen the article, but I would be happy to take a look at it and take it back and see if it's part of something
I'd
we're
just
already
like to
working on.
know,
I share your...
yeah, is the FBI still investigating this, or are these prominent people going to go scot-free?
I'm not sure that I can tell you whether or not there is ongoing work being devoted to this. I would be happy to take a look at the specific article. I share your disgust at Mr. Epstein's conduct and Ms. Maxwell's conduct.
And others.
The whole operation. I would say ghost guns, as you say, represent a real challenge for law enforcement because the kits are cheap and widely available and undercut the ability to trace the firearm and in effect end up undermining the background investigation process. And unfortunately, we are seeing ghost guns more and more in violent crime and gang investigations. Now, as to authorities, you're really talking more ATF in terms of regulation or even legislation, but we do coordinate closely. Whenever we seize ghost guns as part of a takedown, we're obviously working closely with ATF on that. As to other things that Congress can do to help, at the risk of answering every question with the same answer, we need Congress to restore the progress that was made in 23 so that we can sustain our efforts against violent crime and sustain our work in terms of denials of firearms to the people who are legally prohibited from having them.
I believe you're familiar with this report. And what steps have you taken to ensure that there's more transparency, especially to Congress, about the watch list and other data sets maintained by the Terrorist Screening Center as recommended in the report that my committee published?
So certainly I agree, as you stated, that it's important that the database be used to protect our national security and at the same time respect civil liberties. And no one is placed on the watch list solely because of race, ethnicity, national origin, religious affiliation, or any First Amendment protected activities. And there is a rigorous interagency process. There are continuous review and quality control measures. We're constantly taking advantage of new methods and technologies to strengthen those processes. And while the FBI and the TSC, as I know you know because of your other role, are not responsible for the actual travel screening, we do work diligently with the interagency to try to make sure we're maintaining a current and accurate watch list.
What internal mechanisms is the FBI relying on to counter cyber threats to the agriculture industry from China specifically?
So we are specifically concerned, not just as you are, about the China threat more broadly, but about the China threat as it relates to agriculture in particular. I have visited our Omaha office a couple times. I met with our partners there, and I know from firsthand experience and contact with them that they are acutely focused on specifically the threats to agriculture. In fact, they're holding, I think, a big summit soon that I was hearing about that's bringing people from all over the state and the region, again, very much focused on this issue. We have seen in the past the Chinese government or people from China acting on behalf of China attempting to steal cutting-edge agricultural research, even to the point of, I know in Senator Moran's home state of Kansas, we stopped a guy trying to, fly out of the country with cutting-edge agricultural research. In Iowa, I can remember we had guys out in the fields digging up genetically modified corn seed, and we prosecuted, worked with the DOJ to prosecute them. So there's the theft, the IP theft part, and we know that China has specifically identified agriculture as one of its areas that it wants to target. It's quite explicit about that. So that's a concern.
I wanted to explore a little bit the challenge of the plot to murder a Sikh activist here in the United States. The Department of Justice unsealed an indictment, and the individual, I gather, is in the Czech Republic, and that we've established there are extradition possibilities. Is that progressing?
I can say that I'm very aware of the case you're talking about, and I do feel the case is progressing. There's probably not a whole lot I can say about it for that reason, but yes, the case is progressing.
But we're actively pursuing extradition.
We are, I believe I can confirm that much, yeah.
Thank you. The Washington Post reported that U.S. officials have identified the individual in the Indian Intelligence Agency who was the crafter of the plot, and that the plot was approved by the Chief of Research and Analysis Wing, which is the Indian spy agency. I have not seen that we are pursuing indictments, but are we pursuing indictments against individuals who, not just the hired assassin, if you will, but those who planned and plotted the assassination?
So that's a question that I can't answer here.
No former president, no major candidate for president has ever been prosecuted criminally in American history. Yet now we have a situation where the incumbent president's major candidate, major opponent, is being prosecuted in 5 separate jurisdictions all by Democrat partisan prosecutors, and all of this culminating right in the middle of an election season. Does that sound to you like coordinated election interference, or is that just a coincidence?
Well, I'm not going to discuss pending state criminal prosecutions. That's not something I would ever do. I'm
talking about utilizing governmental authority to interfere in an election. Let me get more specific. What we saw happen last week was Alvin Bragg, who ran on a platform of getting Trump, do just that with a flimsy made-up theory and a criminal conviction. Just this weekend, the leader of the Soros organization came out and advised Democrats to repeat the slogan, "convicted felon," so it could be imprinted on voters' minds. Alvin Bragg facilitated that imprint and did just that. Is that coordinated election interference, or is that just a coincidence that would happen?
Again, with all due respect, I'm not going to talk about, you're talking about a state.
Well, I'll go to a federal level then. Right. If you look back to April of 2022, the New York Times reported that President Biden had told his advisors that he wanted Donald Trump prosecuted. That was printed in the New York Times. Just days after President Trump announces that he's going to enter the election process, Merrick Garland appoints Jack Smith to prosecute Trump, President Biden's opponent. Is this coordinated election interference to go after your opponent in a federal election, using the Justice Department to do it?
You're asking about a special counsel appointment by the Attorney General and a pending federal case that is in front of a federal judge, and it's not something that I can appropriately discuss here.
Do you think it's important that the FBI maintain its independence from any efforts to politicize the federal law enforcement system?
Very much so. I think the FBI has a unique role to play in American society and in our legal system.
And we're still not able to do the interdiction that is making a difference to turn this around. You got any words that you can share with people who are really very, very anxious about what we're seeing with fentanyl?
Well, certainly, I'm acutely aware of what a big problem is up there and of some of the challenges that law enforcement in your home state have to contend with. I've been up to visit, as you know, a couple times, and on one of them in particular, the Alaska State Troopers, with whom we have a great relationship, took me up in a helicopter to be able to kind of get a better sense of just the sheer sprawl and remoteness of some of the communities that you're talking about. We are working through the Alaska High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Initiative, and that's a big part of it, not just on the investigations, enhancing those, but promoting interagency partnerships, increasing awareness.
What kind of additional resources or different strategies can the FBI employ? Because obviously fentanyl still streaming across the southern border. They're obviously pressing a lot of the pills before they come over. The whole thing with the chemicals coming from China. What are you seeing in this in terms of targeting the transcontinental criminal organizations?
So certainly the vast majority of the fentanyl in this country comes from the cartels in Mexico, sourced from precursor chemicals from China.
Right.
And then is trafficked here or distributed here primarily by violent gangs. And so I think to be effective against the threat, which is really an epidemic, we need to be trying to hit all of those different choke points. The FBI plays some role in almost all of them.
How are we sharing? How is the FBI sharing what you know with local law enforcement and election officials so that everybody's aware of what the threat is?
So we are, of course, seeing, and I've been warning about this for some time, the role of AI to enhance efforts that our foreign adversaries have already been engaged in. And one way to think of that is just like social media, when it first really came of age, was this gigantic bullhorn that took something that has been happening for decades, namely foreign disinformation warfare, and just scaled it in a way that was particularly challenging. I think that's the right way to think about AI. It's not that it changes fundamentally what it is our adversaries want to do, or why we need to be worried about, or what authorities the FBI has in our role in combating it. It allows them to amplify, to do it, to make it more sophisticated, more deceptive, cheaper, faster. All the reasons people love AI for good things, they can use for bad things.
And now the subcommittee stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. Thank you.